Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kursk direction, because today on the 12th of August we got the most important update since the beginning of Ukrainian offensive operation, and we're talking about the central part of Sudzha, because according to information we have, the central part of Sudzha has fallen. In this video we can see the Ukrainian soldier who was moving along Zolomotova Street, or who was moving along Karla Marx Street in the central part of the village, and he was talking about that there are no more Russian soldiers inside of Sudzha itself, that the city is under complete Ukrainian control. Later we got additional video a little bit to the south from the first video. In this part of the video we can see the Ukrainian vehicle that was moving also along the same street, and this video also confirms complete absence of Russian soldiers on the territory of the city. The Ukrainians established complete control over the territory. Most likely the Russians still control the eastern part. We are talking about the territory between the streets of Oktyabrskaya, Stроительная Street, Engels Street, but also, as I understand, the situation for the Russians in this area is critical. We will discuss this in a minute. Let's complete with the central part. As you can see, we haven't adjusted the map because, telling the truth, I'm not sure how exactly should we correct the map, because maybe the Russians control just the Sudzha and the city of Goncharovka, maybe the Russians control the Aleshenka and Sudzha, maybe the Russians control everything. Anyway, summarizing everything, as I understand, by the end of the 12th of August, the Russians most likely established complete control over this part of the Sudzha agglomeration. And let's move to the eastern part, and as we discussed a minute ago, the Russians most likely staved their presence in this part, but today the Ukrainian sources also published very interesting video. In this video we can see the military vehicle of Armored Forces of Ukraine that was moving along Central Street. So as you can see, we don't see any resistance from the Russian side. The Ukrainians feel themselves pretty comfortable, and that means that Ukrainians control not just the street, most likely the Ukrainians have a strong control over this entire territory. And telling the truth, according to this video, most likely the Ukrainians still control some buildings and some constructions along Stроительная Street further in the southern direction. So this is the situation, and summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians either are about to fall back from the eastern part of Sudzha, or they will be encircled by the Ukrainians, and they will wait until the Russian main forces are able to get here to unblock them. So let's continue, but the situation, as you can see, is very critical, despite the let's say talks and statements of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation and Russian authorities that the situation is stable, that there are no Ukrainians in Sudzha, but we see that the facts and the reality tell us completely different story. Now let's move to the northern Sudzha direction. As you can see, we have adjusted the map because during the previous 24 hours we received significant number of geolocations of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions. In this video we can see aviation strike on Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of the village by the name of Levchenka to the south of Anastasievka. Furthermore, in the same area we have the video how the Russians discovered the movement of Ukrainian tank T-64 as I see, and as a result of Lancet strike that T-64 tank was destroyed. This video was geolocated between the villages by the name of Steptuhovka and Novoselovka. Furthermore, we got additional video from the area of Zhuravli, and in this video we can see the Ukrainian armored vehicles were concentrated somewhere along the water reservoir, and the Russians, as a result of Lancet strike, destroyed this entire concentration. This video confirms Ukraine control over this territory as well. But considering this area, we got another very important video more precisely two videos that were published by the Russians. The Russians began counter-offensive operation, at least in this direction, and as a result of series of counter-attacks, the Russians managed to secure at least this territory. In this video we can see how the Russians were getting trophies from destroyed Ukrainian vehicles that were probably moving towards the mainland. The Russians managed to secure Kremennoye, and this territory is already under Russian control. According to the map, the village always was under Russian control, but most likely yesterday, the day before yesterday, the Ukrainians were, let's say, taking under control this village for some period of time. Now let's move to the village of Snagast. Today the Russian sources reported that the village is already under Russian control. At least we got these updates in the morning, in the first half of the day. Later different mappers have adjusted their maps based on that report, and right before we start making the evening this video, the Ukrainian sources reported about the Russian sources reported about a series of counteroffensives that were conducted by the Ukrainians, and according to the Russian sources there are very heavy clashes right now in the vicinity of the village. So most likely during the night the Ukrainians will be able to restore some positions and the village will be split in two parts. As for course direction, as for additional topics, it's very important to discuss the situation in the vicinity of Tyotkina. The Russians discovered a very big concentration of Ukrainian forces right in front of the village of Tyotkina. The Russians are expecting that during upcoming night, the Ukrainians will begin offensive operation in this direction. The same thing we can say about the village, about the city on the northern part. We are talking about Glukhov. The Russians also discovered additional concentration of forces, and the Ukrainians most likely during the upcoming night are going to begin full-scale offensive operation in this direction as well. Now let's talk about the southern area. The local authorities, Russian authorities, announced the evacuation of entire borderlands. The Russians have already evacuated 180,000 people, significant number, the biggest number of people since the Second World War, as I understand. Not maybe since the Second World War, but since the Chernobyl nuclear disaster or something like this. And during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians conducted a series of offensives exactly in direction of the territory that the Russians announced as evacuation zone. We are talking about Krasnaya Ruga direction. Most likely this is the second territory where the Ukrainians are going to launch a full-scale offensive, because during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians conducted a series of attacks with the purpose to understand and to discover the real situation and the Russian positions along the border. During the previous 24 hours there were very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Kolotilovka. The Russian sources published the video how they were attacking the Ukrainians who were located along the border. According to information we have, by the evening of the 12th of August, the Ukrainians haven't managed to break the Russian border and to move further deep inside of the Russian territory. Almost the same attack, or the attack with the same purposes, took place on Zolochev direction. The Russians discovered this attack at the beginning and they began bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in Zolochev itself. But the Ukrainians, after this artillery preparation, managed to concentrate forces and to begin the offensive. For this offensive, the Ukrainians were using significant number of armored vehicles and personnel carriers, but just 2 or 3 of them managed to reach the border. And when the Ukrainians reached the border, they made a lot of attempts to cross this area, but most of those attacks were repelled in the vicinity of the village by the name of Bezemenne. Anyway, we see that the Ukrainians conducted an offensive. They were trying to understand the exact number of Russian forces. They were trying to understand the time the Russians need to react on another Ukrainian attack. Most likely during upcoming night, the Ukrainians will make more attempts to break through the Russian border in this area as well. Furthermore, I'll remind you that a few days ago, the Ukrainians established control over the village by the name of Poros. Maybe the Ukrainians are not controlling the village right now, but we remember the video with the photos with Ukrainians who were making selfies, let's say in front of Russian town hall or the main library or the local library. In this video we can see 5 Ukrainian soldiers with 2 soldiers or 1 soldier from Foreign Legion from Georgia. They were saying that they captured the village, but the Russians are saying that after this video the Ukrainians left the village. Anyway, during the previous 3 days during the Kupinsk offensive operation, the Ukrainians Ukrainians have already conducted 3 attempts to break through the Russian border exactly in this area, which make us to think that this is also the primary direction for the armed forces of Ukraine. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were hunting and trying to destroy the Ukrainian headquarters. And according to information we have, one of the headquarters of armed forces of Ukraine was discovered and destroyed in Sumy. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians were using this territory for controlling or organizing their attempts, their offensive operation in Kursk direction. Additional few more important statements about Kursk area. Today, and we got some interesting article about the interview that Zelensky made on Saturday. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday that Kyiv wanted to push the war on the aggressor, so Russia's territory, and put pressure on Russia to restore justice. But officials have otherwise made little comments on the operation. Elements of at least 6 Ukrainian brigades are involved, according to the soldiers and the FT service review of combat footage published by the Ukrainian brigades on social media. And furthermore, the Ukrainians are saying that the main goal, the main purpose of this attack, and Zelensky himself stated that the main purpose of this attack is to capture Russian territories. The Ukrainians are trying to get additional territories on the Russian side, on the old Russia, with the purpose to get the better negotiation positions before possible peace negotiation that obviously is going to take place in the end of this year. But after this Ukrainian provocation along the border, the Russians, more precisely the President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, stated that there are going to be no peace negotiations with Ukraine and with Zelensky himself. And this is the statement. So obviously during the next 4 months until the end of the president elections in the United States of America, the Russians will do all they can, all their best to restore control over the borderlands. The thing is that in the end of this year, there are going to be president elections in the United States of America, and we remember the ultimatum that Donald Trump made to Russia and Ukraine. He said that if Ukrainians are not going to sit on the negotiation table, then United States of America will stop support and supply Kyiv with weapons. Also, Donald Trump stated that if Russia is not going to start negotiation with Ukrainians, they will give Ukrainians as much as possible weapon. So the Ukrainians haven't seen this number of weapons since the beginning of the special military operation. And now we understand that Russia is in a very critical situation. They understand that within the next 4 months, they need to restore control over this territory to have the best positions in negotiation process. Putin will never accept the territory losses of Russian Federation. He will never accept this. He can't do this according to Constitution of Russian Federation. So that means that he will be forced, if the Russians are not able to restore control over borderlands until the Donald Trump become the president of the United States of America. That means that the Russians will be forced to refuse the Donald Trump ultimatum, which will force the United States of America to begin supporting Ukraine with so many weapons as they can. Furthermore, now let's move further to the line of combat contact. We have very interesting video from Mirnograd. In this video that was published today, the Russian sources managed to discover the position of Ukrainian Su-27, and as a result of Iskander strike, that Ukrainian Su-27 was destroyed. This is very important video. Why is that? According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians asked authorization of United Kingdom. They asked United Kingdom authorization to attack the territory of Russian Federation with missiles, with Storm Shadows, and so on. And of course, we understand that United Kingdom, due to the situation in Kursk region, most likely would authorize Ukraine to attack the territory of Russia. So that's why the Ukrainians prepared themselves and they brought Su-27s as close as possible to the line of combat contact, and the Ukrainians were already ready to begin bombing the territory of old Russia with cruise missiles of United Kingdom, and most likely United United States production. But the Russians discovered the concentration of Su-27s and they attacked them with Iskander. Anyway, upcoming night is going to be very difficult because the Ukrainians will receive this authorization, and most likely during the upcoming night the Ukrainians will conduct a series of attacks on the territory of Old Russia. Furthermore, we got a very important report from the territory of Republic of Belarus. The sources are saying that the Belarusians are redeploying their air defense systems to Kursk region. The sources are saying that Belarus and Russia are planning to conduct military exercises on the territory of Russia, but obviously we understand that due to the authorization of Western countries to attack the territory of Old Russia with attacks and storm shadows, the Russians need to improve their air defense significantly. And one of the options they found is to use the air defense systems of Belarus, which will of course lead to possible problems on the territory of this state as well. So let's follow the situation. As you can see, the things are developing very fast. And furthermore, the Russians will basically return back the air defense systems that they gave Belarus in the past. Now let's move further and let's talk about northern Kupiansk direction. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west of Tabaevka. And as a result of clashes, the Russians captured a series of the fortifications and strongholds in this direction. And now, as we can see, the Ukrainians found themselves in a very critical and difficult situation. The Ukrainians, who are located between Tabaevka, Kotlerovka, Kislovka and the railways, are basically appeared in a cauldron, and they have just few options: either to fall back towards Pischane or to stay there and to stay there forever. So most likely during the next few days the Russians will improve their positions and they will capture these territories as well. And then the battle for the northern Pischane is going to start. Now let's move further, and we are going to talk about the southern Kupiansk direction, more precisely about the area in the vicinity of Makeyevka. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published additional series of videos of how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in this area. From this perspective, this is just a regular activity of the armed force of Russian Federation, of their artillery forces, but to understand the real picture in this direction, first we need to increase the numbers of this since the beginning of the month. And as you can see, according to geolocations and according to videos we've been receiving since the beginning of months, the Russians are bombing this territory heavily. And most likely the Russians are about to launch a full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over Makeyevka, Nevska, so over the northern part of the river by the name of Zherebets. Now let's move further, and we are going to Chasov Yar direction. Telling the truth, I'll give you my opinion that the Russians stopped any activity in the Chasov Yar direction because the Russians most likely were forced to redeploy some reinforcements and reserves from this area to the north in the Kupiansk area. And as you can see, during the day we haven't received even a single geolocation because most likely the most experienced and professional Russian FPV drone operators were redeployed from Chasov Yar to Kursk. We got just one video from the area of Grigorovka. In this video that was published by the 56th Motorized Brigade of Armored Forces of Ukraine, we can see the Ukrainian FPV drone operators who were hunting and attacking the Russian soldiers in this area. This video confirms complete control by the Russians over the fields. According to the previous configuration of the map, this territory was considered as contested area, and now we have final proof that this territory was captured by the Russians. Now let's move to Toretsk agglomeration. There are very heavy clashes, and the most important updates are coming between the cities of Druzhba, Pivnichny and Toretsk itself. According to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of the landfill and to the north of the Terikon. All these streets, all these blocks were captured by the Russians. As for the pro-Russian sources, as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter the citadel of Toretsk, the most important defense belt. And according to information we have, this block of Toretsk was captured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. For now, we haven't received even a single geolocation that can confirm this, but obviously if this information is correct, then we can start counting days when the eastern citadel of Toretsk falls. Also, this video confirms that the Russians are not planning to assault the landfill and the Pivnichny coal mine in front. The Russians are trying to encircle this area to cut this landfill from support and then to force the Ukrainians either to fall back or to capture this territory, or to siege and hold this area until the Ukrainians will be without ammo, without weapon. The Russians are not planning to attack this territory in front because this is well fortified landfill. This is the landfill from the, let's say, Russian drone. The Russian drone, as you can see, was flying. And take a look at the level of the fortifications, strongholds. There are underground facilities, mortar positions, machine gun positions. It's impossible to capture this territory. Or if you decide to capture this territory as a storm, as a assault operation, of course this operation will cause significant losses to the Russians. So that's why they decided to wait, to encircle, and then to see what is going to be next. One of the most important update is coming from New York direction. According to information we have, the Russians managed to capture significant number of territory, square kilometers, fields between New York, Yurivka, and Zalizne Pivdena itself. So these fields were captured by the Russians. Most likely the Ukrainians managed to escape the encirclement. The forces of different brigades basically escaped towards Nilipovka. And that's it. So nothing special like Russian offensive operation or something like this. The Ukrainians just abandoned their positions, trying to escape the encirclement, and then the Russians captured the empty space, and that's it. Anyway, summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the New York is about to fall. Maybe even in August, New York will be captured by the Russians. Furthermore, we got additional reports from pro-Ukrainian sources about the Russian progress from Yurivka, New York, to the west in direction of Pantelimonovka and Alexandropol. So according to information we have, these, let's say, additional fields were captured by the Russians. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Pokrovsk direction, where we can see that the entire offensive operation is speeding up by the Russians. Today we got few geolocations that confirm additional progress of the armored forces of Russian Federation. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources. In this video we can see the work of Ukrainian FPV drone operators on the Russian edge positions in the area of Grodovka and Ivanovka. And this video confirms one of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point. Another episode was geolocated in this point. Both episodes confirms additional control by the Russians and that the Russians are about to begin storming Grodovka from at least two directions. As you can see, despite the critical situation on Kursk northern direction, the Russians are not giving up their plans to capture Pokrovsk as fast as possible. If the Russians are able to take under control Pokrovsk, maybe the Russians know something, maybe they understand something that we don't understand, but as I understand, this is all-in operation from the Russian side. The Ukrainians began their own all-in operation in Kursk, and according to the current situation, we see that the Russians are not panic. Everything is like, okay, let's take a look, what are you going to do and what are you able to do. And meanwhile, the Russians continue their offensive without taking a look at the back. They're moving. We continue receiving updates regarding significant losses of armored forces of Ukraine along the death road between Novogrodovka and Zhelana. Few more armored vehicles and personnel carriers were destroyed by the armored forces of Russian Federation as a result of FPV drone strikes. This is the first vehicle that was destroyed. This is the second one. And of course, as for just today, we got just 4 geolocations of destroyed Ukrainian vehicles. But if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of the month, we're going to see significant losses. Let's increase the number once again. Just imagine yourself the number of vehicles, personnel carriers, Abrams, Bradley, Strikers that were destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strikes in this area. The Ukrainians continue suffering significant losses without any chances to restore the situation in their favor. Now let's move to the south Donetsk direction. Today we got a lot of very interesting reports, and according to information we have, the Russians managed to cross TO524 road within 7-kilometer distance. So according to pro-Ukrainian sources, more precisely according to the reports of 79th Brigade, the Russians managed to cut the road in many places and the Russians are moving further. If the Russians, now the Russians are planning to attack further towards the village of Vadiane, and the Russians are trying and will plan to establish complete control over the coal mines around. These are very important coal mines with significant infrastructure, but the biggest problem for the Ukrainians is that all these coal mines are small. So there are not, it's very good positions for, let's say, controlling the movements, for equipment establishing, for communication equipment, but these strongholds are very bad for defense. The Russians are able to capture them very easy, and they will do this in the very near future. And if the Russians are able to reach this red line, most likely Ugledar would be abandoned by the Ukrainians within days, maybe even minutes or hours, but obviously not even within weeks. As for the South Donetsk direction, there are no activity. Most likely the Russians redeploy their forces from this direction to the north, because at this point, at this stage of the special military operation, there is no point to develop offensive further in direction of Velika Novoselovka. So the Russians took a small pause. Of course, they're digging in deeper right now with let's say, purpose to repel possible Ukrainian counterattacks. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians attacked Zaporozhye power plant with FPV drones, and they set some buildings on fire. Very critical situation, but no reactions for different kind of pollutions. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.